Chapter 1974 from the White Book, narrated, off of Google Books. 1974, The Great Migration. New York City, Cumberland Hospital, 1969. The overhead light was bright. Beneath it, on a cold industrial table, Diane laid simultaneously staring at it and slipping into darkness. Her breathing was heavy, and the doctor's instructions barely resonating, but she didn't need them. The experience is one that you never forget. She felt sedated. She'd heard the whisperings and wanted out of this room, out of this situation, and as much as she didn't want to admit it, out of this life. This time, if she crossed over, she didn't want to come back. For years, her situation seemed hopeless, and this was guaranteed to make things worse. She shook her head and shut her eyes tight. She wasn't one for religion. She didn't know any scriptures and had never read any surahs or psalms. She didn't believe in them, but for this occasion, she formed her own. She had to do something. The pain was unbearable, and Diane needed it all to end. How the fuck did I get here, she thought. God damn this shit. Lord, or whoever you are, if you think anything about me. Brooklyn, 1949. How indeed, 20 years earlier, Diane had asked her mother about their roots and received an answer that was much too common where we were from. I'm gonna tell you like my mama told me. We lost all our history and heritage in the holds of them slave ships that brought us from Africa. And if any pride or self-worth did make it across, it was beaten out of us when we got here. We are the children of free people that were captured and sold into slavery. Violence and bondage were all our people were taught in America. And all that you know is all that you can teach, Florence snickered. You go to school tomorrow and tell Mrs. Crabtree I said that. Diane nodded. Now, I don't know about no ancestors and all that, but I can tell you about me and mine. But this ain't for no classroom or no teacher. This is for you and you only. My mother never knew for sure, but she always suspected her father was Mr. Davies, a Mormon man that her mama worked for. Now, as for your father, New York State, White Plains, the late 1930s. Florence Smarter was 23 the year she met Aaron Prentice Wade. He was a good man, educated for his day, and full of life. He worked at the Davies-owned lumber mill and fell in love with Florence the moment he laid eyes on her. She was attracted to him too, but neither could ever show it. Aaron was disciplined and patient enough to tame what stirred in the pit of his stomach whenever Florence was around. For months, he pretended not to notice her, stealing glances only when it was safe to. He'd catch her doing the same. Heated nights twisting, turning, and soiling the sheets were common for them both, but rarely did they speak, and each remembered vividly their first kiss. After that, tension between the two became unbearable as they await Mr. Davies' annual business trip out of town. Aaron's mind was elsewhere, and his work around the mill had suffered as a result. None of it had escaped the eye of Mr. Davies. When the special night came, everything went as planned. Inside the mill, the two mated like cicadas. This moment was what they'd lived for, and for it, someone would die. Outside, the air was thick and heavy as crickets chirped loudly under the full moon. Inside, their eyes were watching God. Aaron's droning made it impossible for them to hear the footsteps approaching. The door flung open as the two lay panting and groping one another. Aaron got up and reached for his clothes, never seeing the fire in the eyes of Mr. Davies. Florence knew it well. She ran at him full speed, trying to buy her lover some time. Mr. Davies swung and broke his daughter's nose. She screamed, fell down, and lost consciousness. Aaron rushed him. Florence came to as they struggled, seeing nothing but red. Red covered her face and the floor. With the taste of blood in her mouth, she reached for the wall and a small red axe. Moments later, nude and covered in blood, she straddled the body on the floor. Aaron was watching his life go down. This was not his plan. "Florence, what we gonna do?" he asked. "Somebody had to hear all this. Somebody knows he's here. We gotta go, baby. We gots to go." Florence was in shock, screaming and waving wildly. "Go away! Just go!" Aaron wanted to console her. He fell to his knees, gave her a series of quick kisses, Then he placed his hand on her shoulder. She touched it gently. Aaron put his other hand on her bloody belly and then wiped it in the dirt. "You've got to run, Aaron. Now! Go!" So much could happen in a moment. A man dies, a child is conceived, a man loses his freedom, and a woman gains hers. That moment was the closest Diane Smarter ever came to her father. After the incident, Florence found herself the center of attention. Aaron was blamed, and the lynch mob spent weeks hunting him. When Diane was born, Florence became an outcast. A truck driver named BJ, who delivered to the mill, took pity on her. He also saw this as his chance to take up with one of the forbidden Smarter women. They moved to New York City, married, and had 3 children in 6 years. As they grew, so did BJ's hatred of his wife's ways. At 16 years her senior, he was no match for what boiled in Florence's blood. She was tired of her husband's long trips, and BJ was enraged when he found out she'd been getting passionate with someone else. But as we know, Florence was a fighter. The out-of-control look in her eyes when she slashed BJ's arm with his own straight razor assured him that the rumors were true. He decided then that he wouldn't share the same fate and hit the road, leaving her and their 4 children alone. Brooklyn. By 1954, Diane was almost 15. That year, Florence gave birth to her second sister. Diane wasn't happy. She'd become more mother than sibling, and with 4 kids to care for, there was no time left in the day for her happiness. Another child meant another mouth to feed, one less item for her at the store, and one more head to do. Diane was through. She'd seen her mother cry and scream herself to sleep at night after too much bourbon. Diane could never be sure if she was longing for the loves she'd lost or cursing them. She decided at the tender age of 15 she'd learned enough to begin her own chapter. She got it from her mama, how to get a man, and the things Florence didn't teach, Diane had learned by watching. Everything, including what she believed were Florence's mistakes. My mother cares too much. She cares about the past and the things she did. She cares what these men think about her. She cares if they love her or not. Diane swore that she would never fall into that trap. The whole world could hate her. She was young and beautiful and would make it through. That year, she met a Martin, a 19-year-old Annapolis naval recruit on leave in New York. She liked him. He was different from the city boy she knew. He was tall and muscular, honest and caring, and best of all, a virgin. A week after, Diane gave it up. Martin asked Florence if he could marry her. Even though he was polite and respectful, Florence didn't approve until her daughter explained to her about the extra money she'd be receiving and the one less mouth she'd have to feed. Only then did she agree to sign the papers. Diane gave birth to her first son, Everett, in the summer of 1955 and quickly adjusted to life as a wife and mother. She'd been raising children all her life. Now she had her own, and as one of the younger wives, the others treated her special. Money wasn't a problem, and they'd spent most days browsing the local department stores, supposedly hunting for sales, but it was really to kill the boredom. Martin was working long hours and taking on extra duty assignments, trying hard for a promotion. When he was home and felt up to it, Diane would let loose on him. 3 or 4 times was nothing, and Martin was delighted to be on the receiving end. At last, Diane was happy and truly missed him when he was gone. She'd get hot just seeing her husband walk up in his uniform, and lately she could even relate to her mother. Then came the birth of their second child in '59, a baby girl they named Shirley. Just now able to drink legally, Diane had dropped out in the 9th grade and had 2 kids. Sex, like it often does, had started to lose its hold on the young couple as they found themselves no longer playing house. Martin had taken long duty assignments in Hawaii, leaving the family alone for months in the small military town. Shopping didn't cut it anymore, and extra money was scarce since Shirley was born. Diane was going stir-crazy, and in the afternoons when the kids were at daycare, she'd hang out in town with some locals who sold weed and such, the whole time getting closer to a young dealer named Anthony. They'd spend days joking and wasting time. Soon, he was coming over after she put the kids to bed, listening to music and smoking. Then Martin came home with the news. "Diane, we need to talk. You've been cheating on me in my own damn house." "What the fuck, Diane? The neighbors tell me you've been in the yard smoking marijuana. What if somebody reported us? I'm up for a promotion. I've told you about that. Martin, I ain't never cheated on you. We got kids. I ain't gonna disrespect our house like that. Yeah, I had some company, and I was smoking outside, but that's because I didn't want it around the kids. What do you want me to do? You leave me here for months at a time? What do you expect me to do? I don't want to hear it, Diane. You know this has been a long time coming anyway. You lay around here, you don't work, you don't go to school, you don't do shit. You what? Screamed Diane, seeing things clearly. The 4-month duty assignments, the lack of sex, all the little comments since Shirley was born. She hadn't seen it before, but maybe that was because she didn't want to. This moment hurt, yet it felt familiar. She'd seen it all before and sworn that it would never be her. Who is she? Diane asked calmly. Martin took the next hour confessing and explaining all the feelings he was harboring. He cared for her, and he loved his kids, but he was moving up, and he wanted someone who was moving with him. She didn't even have a high school diploma. He was headed places that she couldn't follow, but a young woman he'd met in Hawaii could. He'd promised to help as much as possible and take care of his kids, but his admission was inevitable. Diane, I want a divorce. You uppity ass N-word, go to hell and take your slanty-eyed bitch with you. I don't want nobody who don't want me. You just take care of your kids. You could have your fucking divorce. Shit, I could always get a man. That was true, but there was also truth in what he'd said. Diane put that out of her mind. I'll get through. Diane left the house and went straight to the block, leaving her children and that life behind. That night, Tony took her to his mother's house, where they got high and had sex until the sun came up. It was like that for the next 2 months until things were set for her return to Brooklyn. Back in New York, the 8 people cramped into a 2-bedroom apartment easily became better acquainted. Florence was waiting tables at a 24-hour diner in Times Square. After a few weeks, she started dating the owner, Melvin. Melvin was an older man. He'd never been married and had no kids, so he did for both of theirs regularly. Diane was happy to be back around familiar faces, happy her children were getting to know their aunts and uncles, and happy knowing that as bad as New York may have seemed then, it was the city of dreams and anything could happen. Still, she couldn't help but think maybe Martin was right. Maybe her future was limited. But like clockwork, every couple of weeks, Anthony would come to town with the cure for her worries. Diane had written and explained the game to him. After a month or two, he decided to open up shop on Fulton. They'd rent a 1-room spot to chill for a few days, and he always left her with enough money and weed to get through till the next time. Pretty soon, it was taking more and more to ease her mind. Soon, an occasional bump of coke became a weekly hit. Then, twice a week, just to get through, she'd say. Then more and more until at last, it was all she could think about. Now, she had 2 secrets that were getting harder to hide. Anthony had saved up and decided to move to Brooklyn. He never told her. He just popped his ass up one day and said, "Come on, I want to show you something." Something was a 1-bedroom apartment he'd gotten a few blocks away. Diane had always seen Anthony as just a young brother with some good dick, but this move gave her that glimmer of hope she needed. Now she thought that maybe they could make something out of this. Melvin gave her a job working nights at the diner, and the kids would shuttle back and forth between Florence's apartment and hers. One night, after too much malt liquor, she decided to break the news about the 3 periods and the doctor's appointments she'd missed. Anthony had just finished bagging up. He sat there counting money and looking out the window. His back was turned, and Diane couldn't see his face. "What do you plan to do?" he asked. "It's up to you." "Yo, Diane, how you gonna leave it up to me?" Anthony sounded annoyed and frightened. "If you was going to do that, you should have told me a long time ago. And what about your sniffing, yo?" Diane was ashamed and put her face in her hands. Tony scoffed. "Thought I didn't know." "I promise I'll stop. I ain't going to do that shit no more, Tony. I swear." They made up, and for the next few months, all seemed to go well as they prepared for the arrival. Diane kept her promise to stop sniffing. It was almost easy now that she saw a light at the end of the tunnel. She figured that the sight of her stomach getting rounder with each day would broaden Tony's view on children. In her 5th month, he brought home a stroller and crib. She took the night off. They celebrated with some booze, wine, and talked about what they named the child. In the 7th month, he gave her money for clothes and a bassinet. Florence and Diane spent the day shopping and picking out things before she went to work that night. The next morning, when she got home, she knew instantly that something wasn't right. Tony was gone. More importantly, the coffee canister that he kept his stash in was gone. It was cloudy that day, and Otis Redding's Pain in My Heart played on the radio. In the back of her mind, she'd expected something like this, and in the back of the medicine cabinet, she kept her remedy. She reached into her pocket and peeled off $1, rolled it up, and sat on the toilet sniffing, crying, and wondering if there really was a curse on the smarter women. Less than 2 months later, Diane gave birth to her second daughter, Mallory, was just 4 pounds at birth, and the pain of the delivery was unbearable. As soon as she was born, she started crying, and the crying never stopped. The doctors recognized her pain. They gave Florence custody of the baby and Diane 11 months in a rehabilitation center where every day she vowed that whatever happened, Mallory would be her last child. Louisiana, New Orleans, Mardi Gras, 69. With its secrets, mysteries, and cultures so thickly mixed, to many it represents the dish it's most famous for. In the 18th century, French, Spanish, Haitian, and Jamaican immigrants came to New Orleans and brought with them what some would call odd religious practices. People call it the Wicked City, destined for a fate like Babylon, and Mardi Gras is its week-long celebration of the rites and practices of the old world. Girl, did you see that? It was halfway down his leg. And thick as a baby's arm, Diane said, laughing and sipping her hurricane. But you sure it was a he? I couldn't tell. Girl, you thought I was playing when I told you how it was down here. This is like my 5th or 6th year coming. I love it. I come down here and I let it all hang out, explained her girlfriend Pamela, collecting another handful of beads. She'd worked at the cheese factory with Diane for just under a year. She and Diane got along well. You need a vacation, girl. You got to get out and have some fun. The same old thing will drive anyone crazy. She'd preach that to Diane day in and day out. Soon that's what drove her crazy. Diane had lived a model, albeit mundane life, since leaving rehab. The counselors had set her up with a steady job, and she'd enrolled in night school. Sometimes she'd take Shirley and Mallory to the movies or the park, but beyond that, and the occasional card party at Melvin's place, life was work, school, and home. She was glad that she'd taken Pamela up on her offer. She'd only been here for a few hours, but already she was feeling the whole southern scene. She was seeing things for the first time with clear and open eyes. Come late afternoon, and all the excitement was taking a toll on them. The two decided to stop at Pat O'Brien's, famous in the French Quarter for crawfish. Pam, you been down here all them times, and you ain't never tried these things. Yeah, I tried them before, but they ain't all that to me. Shit, they ain't nothing but baby lobsters anyway, and lobsters ain't shit but ocean roaches. You ever turned them over and looked at them? Shut up, girl, I ain't trying to hear that. If that's true, these the best bugs I ever had. You want some? Asked Diane, tossing aside the shells. Yeah, bitch, give me some. I ain't did shit but drink since we got here. I better put something in my stomach. Look at they beady little eyes. Ugh. They laughed, ate, and discussed the night's plans between bites. Pamela had several friends that she'd hook up with when she came to town. One for whatever zone she was in. She had her swamp friends. She'd slide down there and hang out after hours. Then there were the regulars, tourists who came in each year from cities across America for the festivities, good for cruising the quarter at all times of the day, and night looking for another soul to open up with. It was easier to make friends and drink for free at 2 a.m. than in the middle of the day. She'd come across some society types too, the elite of New Orleans, with more than enough money to keep her interested and coming back. There was something about them she could never quite put her finger on. The top layer was covered with politeness and etiquette, but underneath the surface, they seemed just a little dangerous. Tonight, they were headed to one of their parties. The mansion was loosely fashioned after Rennes-le-Château in the south of France, and it's been said that the Duke of Orleans himself would be honored to reside there. It was equipped with a dungeon and surrounded by gardens, groves, and a moat to help accommodate guests or unwanted visitors. It was now owned by Frere Macones of its aristocratic designers, the Valois, aka the Kings, and it was a notorious meeting place for groups ranging from Heptasophs to the Hellfire Club. Jack Lilly, or JL as he was known to most, was a 31-year-old assistant to Pierre de Louis, who headed the NO chapter of the Kings. As far back as JL could remember, all he ever wanted to be was a king cruising around NO in a luxury car doing as he pleased. Whatever the Kings wanted, they could have. JL knew this for a fact because many times he was the one making the deals go through. A hustler. However things may have seemed to the untrained eye, these were the shot callers in the city, modern-day Vikings with the bloodlines of Norse and Frankish royalty. There was not a continent on earth where they didn't do business or own assets. The world really was their oyster, and unlimited wealth allowed members, young and old, to buy anything with a price. J.I.'s background would never allow him true king status, and when his non-society friends questioned his loyalty, he'd go on and on about how he'd resented his employers, but on the down low, he worshipped them and the titles they held. As some would say, why not? Not many men with black blood in their veins could do the things that JL did or go to the places that he went. It was the 1960s, and he was driving a Rolls Royce, fucking white women, black women, all women. His favorites were the ones with olive skin and wavy hair. His wardrobe was top-notch, and he attended most events with at least one beauty on his arm. For a long time, life had been sweet for JL, but as he'd soon learn, all success has to be earned. Galileo nor Da Vinci himself could not have charted a body as heavenly as hers, yet her walk tells me that she is no angel. Who is that enchanting creature? Her name is Luna, my lord. During relations, she's an equestrian worthy of a Lippizan. I purchased her at a hostel in Palermo nearly 4 years ago. She was only 14, and already she'd learned to love in 7 different languages. Lord Ophiscus rubbed his hands together slow and deliberately. Yes, her mother was surely gifted with sight to name her so fittingly. She lights a fire deep within. Pierre agreed and raised his glass to Ophiscus. But I must inform you, my lord, her appetite is quite voracious, especially when chasing the dragon, which she's also developed a healthy appetite for. I couldn't be troubled, so I used her as a payment to one of my associates, a Moor of sorts who shares a common taste. Interesting. No matter, said Ophiscus, staring lasciviously infatuated by Luna's curves. I must have her. As you wish, my lord. I have a hall on the 2nd level already prepared. Pierre de Louis moved quickly through the crowd, greeting guests of the chateau and making the necessary arrangements. Lord Ophiscus was not a man to be kept waiting. He was of royal Dutch ancestry, and moved the same circles as another royal, Bernard Julius Coert Karel Godfried Pieter, Prince of the Netherlands and Prince of Lippe Biesterfeld, who was rumored to head a nameless and powerful group. JL was not pleased with his instructions. He knew the things that Luna would be doing and couldn't picture them being done to his favorite. All of the women were too high to care. JL whispered his feelings into Luna's ear as he and the other women he'd gathered climbed the spiral staircase. Midnight was approaching in the Garden of Good and Evil. Pamela and Diane had been enjoying themselves with the other guests, but throughout the evening, Diane's attention had drifted to a small tent set up on the far end of the grounds. On it was a sign that read, Madame Cruzamark, Palms Read and Fortunes Told. She'd always had an interest in the art of divination, but friends and family considered astrology and things of that nature taboo. Cruzamark made Diane uneasy, but worse was her assistant, a Creole woman, dark and heavy-set with bright gray wandering eyes that never blinked. Cruzamark called her Gypsy. Diane had spotted her roaming the hills and talking to the trees between telling people things that they wanted to know. As far as she could tell, Gypsy was fluent in 3 languages. Pamela, I'm going to get my fortune told. You coming? She tugged at Pamela's arm. What's the matter, girl? You scared? What the hell? I'll go. I need to know when I'm going to meet a good man. The line was long, and Diane watched as everyone came out smiling. Maybe that's how it was in New Orleans. Maybe everything had a happy ending. When it was finally her turn, Gypsy took Diane by the hand and spoke to her. You come with me. Soon, she'd have the answer to many questions. Inside the Lord's chamber, they gathered for a feast of the flesh. All were masked and cloaked. Some wore elaborate costumes made to look like everything from burlesque dancers to farm animals. J.L. was ordered to stay and watch over the activities. He waltzed from room to room in a black tuxedo and green phantom's mask, intentionally avoiding the room with Lord Ophiscus and Luna until he was summoned there by the Lord himself. Luna lay dazed and confused in the middle of a huge red circle on the floor. The room smelled of incenses and opium, and all its occupants stood as if waiting on something. Once inside, 2 members of Lord Ophiscus's royal guard closed the ballroom doors and posted up beside them. Luna's body glistened, reflecting the candles that surrounded her. Pierre and Lord Ophiscus stood above her, reciting verses in Latin as blood trickled from tiny teeth marks on her neck and shoulders. In the corner, 2 platinum blondes, naked and adorned in colorful jewels and angels' wings, played a harp and violin. J.L. was used to strange scenes at the chateau and wondered what part he would play in this ritual. One of the guards gave him a mask and instructions. Reluctantly, J.L. stripped and replaced his phantom mask with an extremely lifelike pig's mask, as 2 royal guards lift Luna from the floor. J.L. dropped to his hands and knees and took his place in the circle. Luna was laid upon his back. Her thick black hair fell around the mask. He smelled her. She was sticky, bloody, and smelled of sex. J.L.'s senses were all distorted. He was disgusted and a little aroused until Lord Ophiscus opened his cloak and revealed his buttocks above both their heads. Luna opened her mouth and took him in as the rest of the circle closed in slowly and await the climax. Lord Ophiscus uttered a phrase in Latin and hit the floor with his scepter. That was J.L.'s cue. He closed his eyes and wished he was somewhere else as he raised his head, puckered, and waited to earn his success. Downstairs, the levee had broken, and the crowd thinned out. Pam's luck turned for the better. Soon after Cruzamark's breeding, she hooked up with a friend of Louisiana mob boss, Carlos Marcelos. Diane lounged on the chaise near the entrance to a restroom, wondering if there was any truth to the secrets Gypsy had told her that had nearly sent her to sleep. So into her thoughts, she never noticed the man enter the room. He came out and took a seat next to her. "Excuse me, miss. Is everything okay?" "Yeah. Is it okay for me to be sitting here? What time is it? Is the party over?" Diane asked nervously. "No, ma'am, you're fine. But we are clearing these rooms. Are you here alone? May I escort you somewhere?" "I'm here with my girlfriend Pamela, but I haven't seen her for a while. We're in town from New York." "Yeah, I know Pam. She's been to the chateau before." He introduced himself. "I'm J.I. What's your name?" "Diane. Nice to meet you." She was stunned as she remembered something Gypsy said. "Your eyes, they're..." "Yeah, different colors. One green, one brown. I was born like that. Why? Does it bother you?" J.L. was anxious to find someone he didn't know and that didn't know him. His mind was full of thoughts that he wanted erased. "No," said Diane, easing back. "I was just asking." J.I. felt the vibe change laid on the charm. "Listen, I'm off duty now. My place is on the grounds. Why don't we go back there and get to know each other? I'll tell a friend to let Pam know where you are. If I know her, she might be a while." Diane wanted to erase some thoughts from her mind, too, and Jack looked friendly enough. He was tall, well-mannered, and worked for the wealthy owner of the mansion. She decided to get her groove back. What the hell? I am on vacation. The two walked across the grounds. Diane looked away as they passed Cruzamark's empty tent. When they reached the guest house, J.L. sat her down on a swing fixed to the branch of a large sycamore tree. He went inside, took a quick hit, and gathered some things. Outside, he handed Diane a bottle of scotch and some glasses. They talked and sipped as he fixed a pallet on the ground next to the swing. Diane looked through some 45s. "You got any Aretha Franklin? I love Aretha." "Yeah." J.L. handed her a stack of records. She picked out her favorites. He put the stack on the turntable, lay on the pallet next to her, and did his best tough guy impersonation as he peeled off her slacks. Minutes later, they were getting it on underneath the Gulf Coast stars while one Aretha song went into the next. It had been a minute since Diane had done this, and any touch would have felt good, but she couldn't front. If nothing else, JL's love was king. She was hot, the air was thick, and it was hard for her to catch her breath. JL's mind was working overtime. His heart was busy pumping opium through his veins and pushing his realities back and forth. He wished it was Luna or one of the others he'd become accustomed to, but after tonight's events, a change may have been exactly what he needed to redeem himself. He groped at her skin and thrust harder. Diane whimpered, opened her eyes, and watched as the sycamore leaves played hide and seek. Under the light of the full moon, Diane couldn't be sure what she saw in JL's one green eye. But again, Gypsy's words came to mind, and her body tensed. JL felt it and instantly switched up his flow. Diane relaxed again as the bass line of Aretha's song, Save Me, began to play. She smiled as she listened and drifted off. Excerpt 8. New York City, Cumberland Hospital, 1969. Save me, Lord. Please save me. She woke screaming and gasping for air. Miss Smarter, wake up. You've been dreaming, said the nurse. It's okay. It was just a dream. Congratulations. You're the mother of a healthy 10-pound boy. Huh? Oh my God. I didn't feel a thing. Well then, baby, said the nurse playfully. I guess your prayer worked. Anyway, you were out for a spell. You're in your room now. Where is he? Diane asked nervously. He should be here. I'll see what's keeping them. He's fine. He'll be out in a moment, said another nurse who'd entered the room. The doctors had to remove that tissue that was covering one of his eyes, she said quietly to the first nurse before leaving. Diane was terrified. She closed her eyes and struggled to get the words out. Nurse? Yes, Miss Smarter. Which eye? She asked softly. Which eye was covered? I believe it was the left one, she said. Diane opened her eyes and looked out the window, only to see a fire-red moon looking back at her. Nurse, she said loudly, keep him out there. I'll see him later. I'm tired. Keep him out there. Then she began to cry as she thought, Gypsy was right. New York City, 1974. 5 years later, a 15-year-old Shirley Smarter walked with her little brother through F.A.O. Schwartz toy store. It was just before closing, and all the clerks ignored them. They'd taken one look at them and decided they weren't buying. Okay, Seth, pick out one thing today, and maybe Mama or your daddy will have something for you whenever they get home. Shirley knew better, but she wanted to make her brother's birthday as happy as possible. Even at 5, something in Seth Smarter told him that nothing was promised to him, and he should treat every decision as though it were his first and last. He lived for the moment and went for broke every time. I want a bike, he said. A few months earlier, he'd amazed everyone when he'd borrow one and taught himself to ride in one day. Boy, Shirley popped him on his head and he dropped one of the dice he'd taken from his brother's car. Everett didn't give me that much money. Pick something smaller, and you better make it count. Seth searched his young mind as he picked up the dice. That's when he saw something that jarred the memory of a commercial that stuck in his head. He was always watching TV or daydreaming. Pick something. The store is about to close. Shirley popped his head again, but lighter this time. Then Seth made his choice. I want a Mr. Microphone. That concludes chapter 1974 of The White Book by Makavelli. If you do not own a physical copy of the book, there is a link in the description below to purchase one. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, like, and be on the lookout for the next video.